Now I'm going to skip my normal introduction because this is just a quick video to correct some of the misconceptions that came out of my previous video about the numerology in Daniel chapter number 4. In those passages, I underlined certain words to emphasize the point I was trying to make, and it did not work out very well. So this time I am going to separate the concepts so that you see exactly what I mean. For example, in verse number 3, how great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders, his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. In other words, there are 4 concepts in this very first passage. So these 4 descriptions of God are great signs, mighty wonders, an everlasting kingdom, and a dominion from generation to generation. 4 clear concepts. Now moving on to verse number 3 in chapter number 4. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. Another 4 different items. Now these are the 4 false prophets which King Nebuchadnezzar calls in to explain his dream. That is, magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. 4 different groups of people. Now in verse number 11, Daniel describes 4 aspects of the tree. The tree grew, it was strong, the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the ends of the earth. Daniel describes 4 aspects of this tree which King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. First, the tree is a growing tree. Second, it is strong. Third, its height reaches to heaven, and the sight thereof to the ends of the earth. 4 more different concepts. Now these 3 different verses, with 4 different items in each verse, that pattern is not repeated anywhere else in the entire chapter. What do these symbolize? These symbolize Barack Obama. It's hard to believe that 2,500 years ago, Daniel was prophesying the last president of the United States with this numerology. Of course, we know Barack Obama's number is 444. And now in the next 3 verses we'll look at, Daniel switches to 6 items per verse. And the reason for that is 666, that is the evil forces of the one world government and the Antichrist, will succeed Barack Obama. So following the 444 pattern, Daniel establishes a 666 pattern, starting in verse number 12. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and then it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the earth dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. 6 different items. 6 more descriptions of the tree. Fair leaves, much fruit, meat for all. The beasts of the field live in its shade. The birds of heaven dwell in its branches, and all flesh is fed from it. 6 different concepts. Continuing now in verse number 14. He cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree, cut off its branches, shake off its leaves, scatter his fruit, let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from under his branches. The angel says to cut down the tree, which symbolizes Nebuchadnezzar. Hew down the tree, cut off its branches, shake off its leaves, scatter its fruit, let the beasts get away from under it, and the birds from its branches. Continuing now in verse number 15. Nevertheless, leave the stump of the roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and of brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let the portion be with the beasts of the grass of the earth. Leave the stump of the roots, bound with a band of iron and brass, leave it in the tender grass of the field, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let its portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. 6 more different descriptions of this tree after it is cut down. 6 different items. So now we have 3, although they're not consecutive verses, they're very close together. They follow the 3 previous verses with 4 items each. These all have 666 items. And of course that indicates the evil forces which will defeat Barack Obama. That is the prophecy that Daniel is establishing here in chapter number 4. And now we will look ahead and see the verses which defeat the Antichrist. Now in verse number 20, Daniel begins the sequence which symbolizes the rosary. The tree which you saw, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth. Now what's interesting about these 5 items is that it's the same as verse number 11, which had only 4 items. But Daniel added 1 item to make sure he had his 5. The tree which you saw, which grew, was strong, whose height reached to heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth. Now these 4 descriptions were the same as back in verse number 11. But this was added, the tree which you saw. That gives us 5 different descriptions. Now Daniel continues this sequence of 5s in verse number 21. Whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. Now to again verify that Daniel knows what he is doing, he has taken a previous verse that had 6 items and taken 1 away this time to get his 5 different items. Fair leaves, much fruit, meat for all, the beasts of the field dwell under it, and the birds live in the branches. Now these 5 are the same as back in verse number 12. But 1 has been taken away, and that was the last description that all flesh was fed of it. Now, in chapter number 11, Daniel follows this exact same sequence through the verse structure. That is, there are 4-4-4 set of verses, followed by 18 verses in a 6-6-6 pattern, followed by 15 verses in a 5-5-5 pattern. Now, here in verse number 4, Daniel acknowledges that in the end times there will be 4 mysteries of the rosary. And that's why, starting in verse number 23, there are actually 10 items. And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, and yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, bound with a band of iron. And the king saw this angel. The angel says to hew the tree down, destroy it, leave the stump, bound with a band of iron, and brass, and in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. And the last 5, brass, tender grass, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. The last 5 of this 5-5-5-5 verse sequence. Now it's interesting what this band of brass and iron are. The band of brass symbolizes the one world religion. The band of iron symbolizes the one world government. And the stump symbolizes all that will remain of Western civilization during the 7 years of tribulation. So 2 of the ways that Daniel verifies that his numerology is not accidental, all of these verses with their number of items are in the same chronological sequence. And secondly, the 5 item verses are very important because 1 item was added to a 4-verse section to get 1 5, and 1 item was taken from a 6-item section to get the other 5. This proves that Daniel knew exactly what he was doing, that he wanted the verses with 4s, the verses with 5s, and the verses with 6s. So now I hope the separating of these items within the verses is a little clearer than underlining them as I did in my previous video. Because the numerology in Daniel chapter number 4 is amazing, and it has not been understood for 2,500 years because it is not pertinent until now. Now that Barack Obama has been elected, the 444 refers to him. And in the next video in this series, I will consider Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter number 4, because Nebuchadnezzar is a forerunner of Barack Obama, just as Babylon is a forerunner of the United States. And if you would like a free copy of my book, simply write to the address you see on your screen.